Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I would like to thank you all for joining us today for our chat with Intimacy Director Alexis Black. My name is Carly Lizet, and I will be moderating today's discussion. A little bit about myself. I am currently a senior studying English and Communications. I am also a student intern in the College of Arts and Letters for the Development Office. So before we begin our discussion today, for those of you who may be new to Zoom, I would like to direct you to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You may use the Q&A button to submit any questions you have at any point of the webinar. We will keep track of your questions and be sure to address them to our panelists here today. I would also like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel within the next few days for those who could not make it today, or if you would like to watch it back at your leisure. The only faces that will be shown today and on the recorded version are those of the presenters, so you do not have to worry about your camera or microphone today. I would now like to introduce you to our speaker, Alexis Black. She has received her BFA in performance from Ohio University and her MFA in theater performance pedagogy with an emphasis in movement from Virginia Commonwealth University. She is an educator, fight, movement, and intimacy director, performer, and director. Assistant Professor Alexis Black is about one of 30 professionals in the world certified as an intimacy director for the stage with the IDC, or the Intimacy Directors and Coordinators. As a fight and movement director, she has choreographed in Europe, South Korea, and regionally in the US, including as assistant fight director for Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet for the Tony Award-winning theater, the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. In addition to her work as a movement and fight director, she has choreographed in New York City for the NY Fringe. And warm welcome to you, Alexis, and you now have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly, and thank you to the whole team for bringing me here for Conversations with Cal. I'm super excited. Just a little housekeeping before I dive into my slideshow. You might hear some loud construction banging noises or a dog barking. Consumer Energy decided to tear up the sidewalk literally in front of my house today for some reason. So that is what's happening. And my dog is loving it. So I'm going to dive in here. Let me just share my screen. So here we are today, Conversations with Cal, talking about innovations in modern choreography. And we're going to talk about intimacy for the stage. So when you think about theatrical choreography techniques, I'm curious what might come immediately to mind. We have musical theater dance sequences. It's pretty common to think of that for a dance choreographer. There are choreographers called fight directors or fight choreographers that work with sword fights or other combat sequences. But what about thinking about the physical intimacy between characters and a choreographer working with that? So up until about 2015, I didn't actually know that there were tools specific to looking at these scenes. As a fight choreographer, I was sometimes asked to look at scenes that had intimacy in them and would kind of guess my way through with the knowledge that I had to safely choreograph those moments, work with contact improvisation or grabs, shoves, violent moments, kind of working that into these intimate moments. But it didn't feel like it was responsible or it was enough to just guess my way through, work my way through, stumbling. And I even saw directors when I was working as a fight choreographer asking actors to go figure this out on their own. And this didn't strike me in the right way. Working as a movement coach for shows, I would see so many moments of a show from a staged brutal moment of violence to a farcical comedic sequence like falling downstairs or coming in and out of doors in a comedic way, all that being choreographed, all that having the structure in place to do so. And directors might even spend 20, 30 minutes working on the way an actor entered through a door and sat down to make sure that looked perfect, but then ask actors to work out these moments of intimacy completely on their own without any supervision. So this really led me to wonder, why are moments of intimacy, staged intimacy, not given the same attention as fights or dance or other physical movements in theater. And this led me to seek out and study this emerging field of intimacy direction for the stage. So today I'm going to be looking at a couple of things. I will define what is staged intimacy. I'll give a brief history and of this emerging innovative field. And then I will discuss the Intimacy Directions Foundation, the 5 pillars. These are 5 elements that are used to create compelling physical storytelling within intimate scenes while maintaining the physical and psychological safety of all involved. And then finally, we're going to look at a few tools that a choreographer might use to create a moment of intimacy, something that we call mapping a moment of intimacy. And you'll see a couple of videos of a hug or very simple intimacy with the actors working through that, so you can see how that might work. So, what are scenes of intimacy for the stage? As you might imagine, they are scenes overall. You can broadly define it as scenes with intimate physical contact. Also, intimacy might be considered simulated moments of sexual acts or staged nudity, but it also can be extended to include these other elements of intimacy. So we might be looking at romantic intimacy, familial intimacy, so a parent to a child, platonic intimacy. And we also look at moments where there isn't actual touching. So there might be an intimacy director can help fill out or help actors work through moments of tension or chemistry on stage. And we also can work in tandem with a violence director to look at staged moments of sexual violence or assault and make sure those are safe all around. What is intimacy direction? So this is as I just said, a comprehensive approach to the creation of these scenes of intimacy. And again, simulated sex acts or nudity on stage. There are different kinds of intimacy professionals. We have the intimacy director, and that is what I am certified in. That is for live performance. And then we have intimacy coordinators that work in film or TV. And this language is also used for fight choreography. So a fight director is in live performance, and a fight coordinator or a stunt coordinator, you might have heard before, those are in film and TV. But overall, these professionals are well trained in this codified practice of choreographing moments of staging or facilitating the staging of intimacy to create safe and repeatable and effective storytelling. So learning about all this led me to be mentored by some leading intimacy professionals in the field. Starting in 2017, I was then trained and certified with the Intimacy Directors International Company in 2019 after those 2 years of training. And then that transitioned to becoming certified with intimacy directors and coordinators as well in March of 2020. So let's get into the history so you know a little bit about what these companies are, and then we'll move on to the pillars. So what are the motivations and the movement that led to the methodologies of IDI, which is Intimacy Directors International, and IDC, Intimacy Directors and Coordinators? Let's get into this history. Journey to 2021. Oh, time moving by so fast. So Tonya Sina is really the founder of this term, or the movement of intimacy direction in a lot of ways. She coined the phrase or the term intimacy direction in her graduate thesis in 2006. For that thesis and beyond, she began to research this work extensively. In her research for that thesis and beyond, she pulled from a lot of different places. She pulled from movement analysis techniques. She pulled from stage combat techniques. She spoke to people in the professional sex industry to find out best practices for consent, multiple other movement methodologies, dance. And then she went even farther to look into what are some mental and emotional health resources that I can bring into a rehearsal hall when working with this type of material. So she spoke to psychologists and psychiatrists as well. So while we at IDC do acknowledge that theater practitioners have had practices around staging intimacy or working through that for probably longer than we know, Tonya Sina really is the person who took a deeper look at the best practices and protocols that would work as a foundation for these moments of physical storytelling. And her methodology was just a really comprehensive look at the work. And this hadn't been done before in such a formalized way. But as I said, other people were working on this. You may have heard of Alicia Rhodus. She's known as being the intimacy coordinator who has been working with HBO for many years, now is training all of the intimacy coordinators who work with Netflix, Showtime, etc. The first show that worked with intimacy direction was The Deuce on HBO. So Alicia Rhodus, at the same time that Tonya was starting to work this out for theater, was thinking about and setting best practices for intimacy in film and just kind of getting started with that. And then Alicia and Tonya and a woman named Siobhan Richardson from Canada, who had also been looking at a lot of these practices in theater in Canada, they connected over their work and in their various areas and mediums and formed Intimacy Directors International in 2016. Meanwhile, in other parts of the United States, there were different people working on regional theater. So we have Sasha Smith, who is on the far left there. She was working with LORT Theaters, which is a league of residential theaters. It's major theaters in the United States. She was working with some of them and working with Chicago theaters on developing best practices for intimacy. And Claire Warden, who's there in the middle, and Tenise Johnson, they are on the far right. They began working with Intimacy Directors International, trained with them, and they brought this work to New York City stages and eventually Broadway, with the show Slave Play being the first official intimacy director on Broadway. And there are so many more additional professionals who have been working with all of this in the past 6 years now. People are working with bringing intimacy into education for the industry itself, in academic institutions, in opera, dance, in the performance unions such as SAG-AFTRA and Actors Equity. Directors are training in this and more. And there are a lot of practitioners in the West End and in London. You may have heard of Ida O'Brien, or Lizzie Talbot just did all the intimacy for Bridgerton in Europe. And there are other practitioners in Australia, Canada, of course, everywhere. So it's really, really growing. So while there are many developing practices in this area, it's still, even in 2016, even with IDI being formed, it still wasn't extremely well known. But this was about to change. You might recognize the hashtag #MeToo movement. So staged intimacy and the need for staged, for more oversight from intimacy directors really started to gain national attention in 2017 due to the Me Too movement. Activist Tarana Burke started using this term in 2006, actually, to raise awareness of how women specifically in her activism were being abused in the entertainment industry. And actress Alyssa Milano then made this viral with a 2017 tweet. So why did this movement have such an impact in theater? So suddenly, through the lens of Me Too, actors began to see these problematic practices, such as how there was intimacy was done as improvised movement with little or no direction. People would say things like, okay, here's the romantic scene, make out. Can you be sexier? Which, what does that even mean? Let the actors go in the other room by themselves and figure it out. There's also a lot of direct pressure or bullying from the director happening around moments of stage intimacy. So they might walk up and go, grab her there, put this there, do this. Slap him and kiss him, get it over with. If you won't do it, there are hundreds of people behind you. So who will, being the implication there. And that was really hard for actors to deal with. So these problematic practices had created a culture that ignored power dynamics within the entertainment industry and the impact that can have on consent. It rewarded actors who did not voice their boundaries and just dealt with it. It encouraged actors to eliminate their body autonomy, so thinking of themselves as worthwhile and as an entity that deserved respect. It may emphasize that the scene or the storytelling is more important than the emotional or physical well-being of the actors that are performing these intimate moments. And it also, very importantly, ignored sexual and physical health. So actors, I mean, we're thinking about this even more with COVID now. How do we take care of actors and their health as they are engaging with people that they may not know until they are in rehearsals together? Also, really importantly, just kind of fumbling through creates this, it really fosters unclear and poor storytelling. So we're not even telling good stories, good repeatable stories with this method. And that led to coercion, objectification, harassment, even assault, and again, poor non-repeatable storytelling. So this is why, IDI was formed in 2016 and IDC was formed in 2020. And this IDC contains professionals from IDI, from the industry, as well as from academia. And their mission is to continue this important work after IDI dissolved. IDI actually completed its mission to foster, advocate for, and help to build the industry of intimacy direction. And then they formed this new company, Intimacy Directors and Coordinators. So that's the history. Let's look a little bit deeper. Oh, great. I just put down who they are. So a three-part approach is a little bit more about intimacy direction. So just so you might imagine what we go through when we're training, we need to look at three major elements. What are some acting and movement techniques? So this is a movement specialist work. So you have to train in how to choreograph, how to tell a dynamic physical story. As you might know, actors work with scripts. So they work with dialogue that's written out in a script. Choreographers have to create that muscular script, that movement script that doesn't have words, that fills out those moments of heightened physical storytelling, such as, in this case, intimacy or violence or dance, whatever it might be. I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that in the mapping section, just give you a little taste of that. Secondly, we really look at and study and research protocols and procedures based in safety and consent for the actors. And third is advocacy. So a lot of our work, the third part of our work is giving artists tools to understand that they have agency over their bodies and the stories that their bodies are telling. And this helps to acknowledge power dynamics in the room and the impact that can have on consent, to make sure that the actors are working in a safe, consensual workplace. So how does this work in rehearsal? A major thing that we work with are what Intimacy Directors Intimacy Directors International formed, the pillars of staged intimacy. We start every rehearsal process by introducing these 5 pillars. So they are the 5 C's: context, communication, consent, choreography, and closure. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So what is context? So this is the who, the what, the when. What is the story? We look with the actors and the director. We identify the moments of sexual content or sexual intimacy that's written into the play. Some of those might be clearly called for in the text, like might even be a stage direction that tells the actors they kiss. But some might arise from the company or the director's interpretation. So we want to make sure that we know what all those moments are and who is involved in those and when they happen in the script. And then we want to know why it's happening. It's really important for actors to understand the reasoning behind those moments of intimacy. And, this says determine the function in the larger story of the scene. So it's really important to know before we build it what the story is we're trying to tell. of course, consent, and all of these pillars overlap. It's not like we look at one at a time. So consent is involved in all of it. But actors discuss any boundaries that they have for the day's exploration. So once we know what the movement might be or what the story is we're trying to tell, we figure out what the boundaries are around that, what they're comfortable with and confident with, what they're not. We're really specific as we communicate about the type of touching, the areas of the body which may or may not be touched, and that's all led by the actors and their understanding of their own boundaries. And again, the context of the scene should be leading this action. What is the story? How are we telling it? And we even talk with casting directors or talk with directors before casting happens so that actors can be fully aware of what might be asked of them and they can consent to even be in the show in the first place. Communication, huge. Actors are, checking in consistently with scene partners, making sure that we still feel good about this, discussing if there needs to be any adjustments. Boundaries can change. Sometimes, especially as actors become more confident with the movement, get to know each other a little better, they might be willing to adjust things, or, based on learning more about the characters, they might want to adjust things. But overall, we treat it just like we have treated rehearsing a fight in the past. Are there moments that should be done in slow motion to make sure that we're doing this safely, or marked, so just kind of talking it out and half doing the movements until we can communicate more fully about what this moment needs to be. So no one is surprised and, being ambushed, so to speak. Then we really want to make sure that we have choreography. So the ID is the intimacy director. The intimacy director and the actors and the director will establish choreography or choreographic parameters. That might mean that there are moments that we set, and then there's a little bit of improvisation between moments. And then we consider a lot of things. I'll talk to you more about the map in a moment, but who is initiating, what is the progression of this moment? What is its duration, its intensity? How does it reach its conclusion? We look at that beginning, middle, and end and what's happening. And then we make sure that that choreography is safe, consensual, and repeatable. And stage management, which is a position that really is in charge of taking down all the blocking that all the actors are doing, all their movements, and so much more. But just for choreography, they need to notate the choreography, which means they write down who is doing what when. So they have that in writing. And then finally, the last C is closure. So this is something that's really important for practicing self-care for the actors, is thinking about these bookends. So at the end of every rehearsal or at the finishing of a moment of a scene of intimacy, actors are encouraged to develop a sort of ritual, a closing moment between them to signify the ending of the work. We found this is really helpful for actors to separate actor from character. So, as Romeo and Juliet, we're doing this moment of intimacy. So we have this high five before we start. We get emotionally prepped. We do this moment of intimacy that's been choreographed. We finish the rehearsal of the whole play or the moment or however that day is set up. Then we do another high five, check in, breathe. And now we're back to being, Pat and Tim instead of Romeo and Juliet. So that is an important final C. So just to dive a little bit more before we get to our Q&A into what this might look like, when we need a structure to use as choreographers, and at intimacy directors and coordinators, we use what's called a map for the moment of intimacy. This is a group of tools that help the actors define the movements that they're doing in a more codified way. It really specify for the actors how they're engaging with each movement. And you'll understand that maybe a little bit more when I break this down. Basically, when an actor can break down all the elements that are part of a moment of staged intimacy, they'll be able to consent fully because they'll be informed. They'll know what's happening. They'll be able to be specific about what they're doing to make sure that they're remaining within their partner's boundaries. And they have methods to adjust these movements. If the director wants something to look a little different, they'll have the tools to do that. And then of course, it's way more you have a much stronger ability to repeat when you have these tools. It's really important. Repeatability is so important. That's a huge part of the innovation of this work, of not making it an improvised moment anymore, but making it choreography, just like a fight, just like a moment of dance. Because we really, as actors, set a specific story with the director that the audience is getting. And we want to tell the same story in week 1 of the show as we do when we've done it for 3 months. And you want, if it's a touring show, you want the audience that's in Michigan to have the same show as the audience when the tour goes to New York City or goes to Texas or wherever it's going. You don't want the audiences to be having a different experience. So it's really important to be able to map. And here are the basic elements that we work with. We have distance, initiations and disengagements, location and shape, intensity, tempo and duration, gaze, and breath. So looking at distance, this references usually the space that's between the actors, as well as maybe the distance of a different body part from each other. So their chests might be close together, but their faces might be apart, something like that. We talk about opening and closing distance, both in fight choreography and in intimacy. And that just means closing distance means getting closer together. Opening distance means increasing that space. An example might be there's an embrace or a hug between actors A and B, and it begins with their chests together, but their hips apart. But then as they dive in a little deeper into that hug, they close distance to make full contact with the whole front of their body in the embrace. Looking at engagements and initiations and disengagements, he is totally disengaging from that hug. So who begins each moment and who ends each moment, basically, is what the initiation and disengagement are. So for example, actor A initiates a kiss to actor B's forehead, then disengages and opens distance, but actor B catches actor A's hand and closes the distance to initiate a kiss on actor A's right cheek. So we also have location and shape. Where are the actors on stage and what shapes are their bodies? So intimacy often includes moments of a sort of tableau or almost sculpture-like poses that help to serve as a guidepost for the actors. So we know we're in this part of the stage, in this pose, or engaging with each other in this shape. And then we travel over here and now we're in this shape, and we have those guideposts to lean on in between moments of improvisation. Location can also be used to indicate where an actor's hand can or cannot be, based on the boundaries of either partner. But shapes, as you can tell from this painting, they do tell a lot to the audience without even any movement or any sort of life in there. You can see that. Then we look at intensity. So the level of pressure or tension is what intensity is, and that is usually indicated as a 1 to a 10 scale. So the amount of energy in the moment of intimacy has a lot of potential for storytelling. So an example for that would be actor A and actor B hug. Actor A is at an intensity of 2 out of 10, so really low. Actor B is hugging actor A and they started at 2, but then they increase their intensity to an 8 out of 10. And actor A quickly disengages and opens distance. So we can really tell that things have shifted because of that intensity getting way higher. Tempo and duration. So what is the speed of each movement? We usually do that from a 1 to a 10 as well, based on what the actors agree on. How long does it last is the duration. So a quick grasp of someone could look violent, whereas a slow grasp could look gentle and caring. So that's what an example of tempo. And duration is really important for staged kissing. For example, a 1 second long kiss is a much different story than a 10-second long kiss. Then looking at gaze. So are the actors focused on each other with their eyes? Is one, as in this upper right one, looking away while the other one isn't? Are they both looking away? Eyes and eye contact can really speak volumes. It's also used a lot in telling a story of consent versus telling the story of non-consent. So eye contact is really important. And finally, we think about our breath. So audible breath, as you might be able to hear the sigh coming from Ron here, Ron Weasley. A hug on a long sigh is very different than a hug on a short, aggressive, as this other gentleman might be doing. As choreographers, it's really important for us to create a soundscape that goes along with choreography in both fights and intimacy, in addition to that physical, that visual story that the audience is seeing. So let's look at how this might work in practice. Let me stop sharing just for a moment. And then, so this is a scene that has two actors who are actually also both intimacy directors. So most actors don't have the language to talk through all of this themselves, but the intimacy director would be there kind of as a third part of that triangle, helping to create this amount of communication between the two of them. Our hope, though, is that actors will eventually be able to speak to each other as intricately and as articulately as these two actors are. But this is us looking at a moment that is a hug and how two actors might talk through that and then perform it.
So our first scene, when we talk about context, we are going to do a goodbye hug in which we are partners, romantic partners, and Zev's character is about to leave for some kind of like military training camp. He'll probably be gone for a few months and we won't be talking, but I'm not necessarily worried that his life is in danger. So it is a goodbye hug, but we're both a little sad about it.
We've already done a draft of what the choreography is going to be, so this would be kind of maybe the second rehearsal or the second half of the first rehearsal.
What are some boundaries that I need to know about today?
The back of my neck is kind of sore. You can touch it, just don't squeeze it.
Okay, great.
Anything for you?
Yes, same as last time we talked. I don't want any kind of touching on my rear and my hips. I don't really like that, but my back is all fair game. My arms are fair game. Yeah, I think that just about covers it.
Great.
Okay, shall we walk through slowly what that choreography looks like?
Yeah.
So I think I come in kind of up here.
All right, there was stuff before that.
Yes,
it starts here.
Grabbed your face, and then I went down your shoulders, squeeze, brush, 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 and then I came in strong.
And my arms are down.
And that's it. What's intensity level is that, do you think?
Probably quite a lot.
So like 7?
Yeah.
Maybe even 7, a sustained 7?
Yeah.
Great.
And I meant like a 1.5 to
Great.
the beginning of it.
Okay, cool. So
Right.
I'll come in?
Yeah.
Great.
And I'll put can you go back?
Yeah.
I need to put a foot back so you can really slam into me.
Cool. Ready?
Yeah. Great. Hands drop.
And I'm kind of neck nuzzling here. Is that okay with you?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I'm gonna pivot this way so the audience can still see my face.
Okay.
And then I go 1, then 2. So low and then high.
And then I think I'll bump up to an 8 there to kind of like really soak it in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think your character has to end it.
I'm gonna take an inhale and exhale, and then I'm gonna push you away.
Okay.
In. Hands to the sides. Push you away. Then I go to leave, and you catch my hand. I stop. Hand on hand. And off I go.
Great. So that's an example of what stage intimacy might look like, building a moment with actors. As you can see, there was even some growth or changes to the movements when they added the intention, but we can always, as directors and actors and the intimacy director, have that language to shift the story easily and check in with the actors if they have any questions or concerns. So that was a small slice of intimacy direction and a snippet of what it might look like in process. I just wanted to mention before we get into question and answer that our goal as intimacy directors with IDC is to raise the bar and eliminate harm. And through the use of the pillars and in our movement training and defined protocols and best practices for advocacy for the actors, our goal is to create this a work environment that is both psychologically and physically safe for the actors. And then we're going to build repeatable moments that have a basis in enthusiastic consent. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for introducing us to such an interesting topic. It's great to hear about your work. So are you ready to dive into Q&A?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So one of the first questions is, how did your career end up here? How did you become an intimacy director? And what is your favorite part of your job?
Favorite part of my job? Oh my gosh. So what, I talked a little bit in the history section about, starting as a fight choreographer and then not having the tools to work with these moments of stage intimacy in a way that I felt was responsible or safe. And really, and I'd worked a lot with Alicia Rhodus in New York City, and she introduced this idea to me and started mentoring me. And through working with her, I just realized that this was imperative. I have an extreme empathy for, the kind of discomfort or even abusive situations that these moments have created for actors in the past. I was an actor for many years before I switched over to choreography being more of my focus. And I've experienced moments like that. And I've spoken with so many actors who have experienced it. So just that the ability and the desire to create consensual workplaces and create a really fun environment for the actors to work in. I mean, it's called a play, right? But if all we're doing is stressing about our safety, or feeling like we're being on the verge of or being harassed, it's just not a fun environment anymore. And oh gosh, what's my favorite part? My favorite part about this work is when everyone just gets really excited about it. Tonya used to say, I wish that actors would be just as excited to work on a moment of staged intimacy as they are to pick up broadswords and shields and hack at each other. Because they're both, you need structure for both, you need choreography for both, but building intimacy was just never fun. And so I do love bringing that joy back into every part of the storytelling that we do as actors. And I think this work really brings that to the intimacy.
Thank you so much. And then we do have an audience question. What preparation of intimacy directors or intimacy coordinators does MSU College of Arts and Letters offer? Do we have any programs related to that?
So we don't have currently we are working up towards adding some classes into the curriculum. My colleague, Tina Newhauser, who runs the stage management program for the theater department, and I are creating a class. It's a 1-credit class that runs in spring 2022 for the 5 weeks that semester. So that will be opening up, and that is an opportunity for stage managers specifically and actors, burgeoning directors, to get the basics of intimacy direction. I also offer workshops that are called Combat and Consent, and we spend it's an hour and a half, and we spend about 45 minutes looking at just discussing different ways to look at consent or responsible partnering. And then we would move into working with a weapon for a little bit. And those were on pause because of COVID, but those will happen next year. But the hope is to have even more classes available in curriculum for people that are interested in this.
Thank you. Also, since the creation of IDI and IDC since 2017, do most productions utilize an intimacy coordinator or director now, and how is that continuing to change?
So a lot more do. You know, it's been a weird time because everything sort of shut down with COVID, and also, you know, shows that are being put up, actors are 6 feet apart. So they have still, even Zoom productions have utilized intimacy directors to help with that. So it's becoming much more widespread, but it is not every show currently uses one. Not every show needs one, but also some shows, due to maybe budgetary restrictions or maybe a lack of awareness of the power of this work, haven't been using it. But we also do have consultants. So you could be not just an intimacy director, but an intimacy consultant. And sometimes we're called in just to work with the actors for an hour on some consensual physical storytelling practices that they can then use to build the work themselves. So that's really exciting. SAG-AFTRA has really regularized, that's the film and TV union. They are really making it a regulation basically for an intimacy coordinator to be on set. And film really leads the way in a lot of those best practices and protocols, and it kind of ends up trickling down to theater sometimes the other way around. But I do think that with that becoming more regularized in film and TV, it's going to start to be a very normal thing to see on stage as well.
And then we've also received another question from the audience. So the question is, if you're saying like you're sword fighting, we have a scene like that, we do get a lot of repetition to get the scene to a place of safety. How do you find a balance for repetition in these scenes that is not gratuitous?
That's a great question. Sometimes I don't know if I can, it also depends on how quickly actors can pick up choreography. So, I mean, if we're talking about a sword fight, I just recently read a chapter in a book about Carrie Elwes talking about building the sword fight in Princess Bride. And they worked for 6 weeks, 8 hours a day to train before they even started filming for that sword fight. And it was a 2-minute, 3-minute sword fight, right? So sometimes he was unaware of how to fight. So that just really helped him. For moments of intimacy, again, you know, depending on how technical it is, depending on if there's safety, you know, concerns, things like that, more repetition might be good. But sometimes we do just have, you know, instead of a rehearsal of a movement sequence at the beginning of a show before the actors get into costume is called a movement call. And there's a fight call, or there's a dance call, or there's an intimacy call. And that might be looking at small moments that there was an issue the previous night, or they just need to, it's a really complicated sequence and they need to look at it, you know. So sometimes they might rehearse a snippet of the show before the show, or sometimes they might just check in and be like, are there any boundaries I need to know about that have shifted? And then they go in and do the show without rehearsing it. So it really is a balance. That's a great question of, you know, I want to make sure I really have this in my body and I don't need to think about it, but also we don't need to, you know, do it so much that it becomes like almost boring, or like, we get it, you know, we don't want the actors to be there. So it is finding a balance.
Okay, and then we have another audience question. Do you think trained directors should be able to be their own intimacy directors on plays if they're able to receive that training?
So it is not currently a best practice for directors to be their own intimacy director, and this is due to power dynamics. And it's actually been an issue for myself, and why I trained a graduate student for the MSU Theater to be the lead intimacy director on recent shows, is because as a professor, when I'm in the room, I have that extra level of power dynamics over the actors, and I want to make sure that they are freely and enthusiastically consenting. So we're not saying that a director a director being trained in intimacy direction is amazing and so helpful. And they can also lead with questions and let the actors kind of take the lead on that to a certain extent. But there's always going to be that power dynamic. There's always going to be that actor going, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get another job with this person. And that kind of little bug is what we're trying to make sure that we don't have in the room as the actors are building these moments of staged intimacy.
Thank you. And then also, how do you think that this growing prevalence of intimacy directors and their involvement in productions is changing the entertainment industry?
How are we changing the entertainment industry? I think it's creating a lot of awareness. And again, this isn't a only female identifying actors have experienced this sort of, the bad side of the abuse or the harassment in shows in the past. It's not like that at all, but it is interesting at this moment. More male identifying actors, when they hear this, go, do we need that? It's fine. And every female identifying actor is like, thank goodness, I'm so happy. And just that that awareness that then comes to actors who may not have experienced that kind of abuse, I think is incredibly helpful and is going to change the industry for the better all across the board. And I think it's just opening doors, creating more room for repeatable good storytelling.
And then kind of going off of that, do you think that it changes the audience experience as well? Does it make these intimate moments almost more realistic because the actors are offered this sense of comfortability?
Actors are often able to go a little bit further into intimacy, knowing that they have this structure in place. So knowing they have ways to close out of a moment, knowing that they've communicated and that the other person is completely on board. It's huge. The same way when actors first start to work with each other on a fist fight, they're not going to really, we're going to make sure they don't hurt each other. We're going to work slowly. But that first rehearsal, they're always like, is that, and if we, as soon as we go, okay, here's the way we communicate, here's the way we're working, then they're able to work with confidence. And that's the same way with these moments. And so it does allow the actors to take more risks because they know what their container is, they know what their boundaries are, and then they can work fully within those boundaries without having to guess or worry about their partner.
Thank you. And we also have another audience question is, what percent of intimacy directors are female? Because I noticed how a lot of the intimacy directors you mentioned were female identifying. And then what qualities do you think that women might have that could give them an advantage for this position?
Oh my goodness. Well, the percentage of female identifying intimacy directors is higher than those that are non-binary or male identifying other genders at this time. And that's something that's actually being addressed within the industry, and that we're trying to be even more inclusive about who is certifying and who has access to that, across with diversity as well. Like there's a lot of the industry is very white right now, which is not what we want or what we're hoping for or what is the best for projects. So that is something that is being addressed by all of the major certifying or major training organizations right now, and something we're hoping to expand and just have a wide variety of voices in that can help with telling specific stories. It's really important in some stories that the intimacy director has a lived experience that could help support that storytelling. And so just having more variety of people that are ready to safely help tell that story is really helpful. Qualities that women have. I think, again, people are not definable by like that simply, but I do think that women started this movement because we were fed up. You know, we were fed up of not feeling like we had power in the room. We were fed up of feeling that like there weren't tools for this moment in which, and the way plays were written for so long, women are often the victims of sexual violence. Women are often, you know, the receiver of a moment of intimacy. And so we weren't even in control when we were acting it, very much less when we were building it. And I think it was just time, you know, I think that's why I think that quality of grit and let's take care of ourselves and let's take care of this community was really important. And, you know, I'm sure there's lots of other qualities that I could mention that women are kind of made to have in because of the way that we are I can't think of the right word, but like culturalized is what I'm trying to say. Like the, you know, the way we're trained to be in culture, which is totally shifting. But yeah, I think that overall, anyone who is an advocate, anyone who believes in consent, anyone who is willing to do the research and do the work to take care of actors in the room that we do. I mean, it's like years of training for us. They have all the qualities that you need. And that is whether you're male, female, identifying, non-binary, anything, you're the right person to do it.
Thank you. And then also, I know you spoke a bit about the differences between intimacy directors and intimacy coordinators. Could you speak a little bit more on that, on the differences between the two?
Sure. So intimacy directors are, and this is terms from IDC. So, you know, people have different terms for the intimacy professionals. There can be an intimacy consultant, and an intimacy choreographer, and an intimacy director. And those tend to work for live performance. So an intimacy director would work on a piece of theater or on an opera or on a dance performance or that's live, or on Broadway, or, you know, just anything where there's an audience in the space with us and we rehearse and then you perform that chunk of storytelling and there's intimacy in it. That's an intimacy director. Intimacy coordinators go on TV and film sets, indie films, all those things. And they work in that very different environment to create moments of intimacy. It doesn't always require as much repeatability, you know, like a piece of theater, they might be performing that moment for months, years of the run of the show. Whereas, you know, if you're filming something, you film that episode for the week and then it's done. So there's a lot of, you know, different protocols in place. And that's why there's very different training for coordinators, which is for film, TV, versus directors, which is live performance.
Thank you. And then could you also elaborate a little bit on what the training process is to become an intimacy director? How long is it? What does it entail? And how do you become certified?
Yeah, sure. So we do lots of things. You know, it's those three parts of the choreography. So a lot of us have trained for a long time just in movement methodologies. So we've trained with the Society of American Fight Directors and we know how to work with weapons or unarmed fighting. We have a lot of body awareness. We're trained in anatomy. We're trained in, I don't know if anyone would know any of these movement methodologies, but like there's Michael Chekhov, who does a lot of imagination-based work. There's Carrie Margolis, who is a lot about the mechanics of the body as an actor. So there's viewpoints with Anne Bogart. There's so many movement methodologies that we train in that tell us how to break down movement into all of its different elements and be able to rearrange those and jumble those together to make a moment of storytelling. And then we have to do training in person as far as, or online with practices and protocols, just like what are our do's and don'ts? Like, what do we need to make sure that we have in the room? We do mental health first aid training. We do anti-racist training, implicit bias training, anti-harassment training, lots of those kind of HR maybe side of it, that just an understanding of mental and emotional health in the room as well as physical health. Yeah, and then there's usually hours and hours of in a mentoring situation where a mentor will watch you choreograph or watch work that you've choreographed and help you really enliven that, fill that out, make that even stronger. So looking at that storytelling side of it too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I have been keeping an eye on the time, and it looks like it is almost 4 o'clock. And with that being said, I would just like to give you another thank you so much. Your work is fantastic, and it's great to see that you take into consideration actors' mental health, their physical boundaries, and your work is truly amazing to hear about. And I would also like to thank all of our attendees for taking their time out of their day to watch today. It means a lot to have so many donors and alumni that care about the work and research in the College of Arts and Letters. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and go green.
Go green.